The morning sun painted the sky orange and pink above the colony of New Haven. Minho Park stood on the observation deck of the main building, watching children run across the green fields below. 3 years had passed since the ship New Dawn brought 50,000 people to this new world. 3 years of building homes, growing food, and making a life among the tall blue trees. Minho was the captain of the colony. He was 42 years old with gray hair starting to show at his temples. Every morning he liked to watch the children play before school started. It made him remember why they had come so far from Earth. These children would grow up on a world where the air was clean and there was plenty of space for everyone. The planet they called Kepler 442c was beautiful. The trees grew as tall as buildings, with blue leaves that sparkled in the sunlight. Crystal clear streams ran through the forests, and the meadows were filled with purple flowers that smelled like honey. The colonists had built their town in a valley between 2 hills, where the soil was rich and perfect for farming. Sora Kim walked quickly across the main square carrying a bag full of books. She was the head teacher of the colony school. At 35, she had taught children on 3 different worlds, but this was her favorite place. The school building was made of white stone they had found in the nearby mountains. It had big windows that let in lots of light, and the children loved to look out at the forest during their lessons. Sora's daughter Yuna was 8 years old and loved to explore. Every day after school, Yuna would ask her mother about the animals they had seen in the forest. There were small, furry creatures that looked like rabbits but had 6 legs. There were birds with feathers that changed color when they flew. Yuna kept a notebook where she drew pictures of all the animals and wrote down what they did. The school had 800 children from ages 5 to 16. They learned about Earth history, mathematics, science, and how to take care of their new world. The older children helped with the farming and the mining operations. Everyone had a job to do, and everyone felt important. Ji-Won Lee was in charge of keeping everyone safe. He was 38 years old and had been a police officer on Earth before joining the colony ship. On Earth, he had dealt with criminals and dangerous people every day. Here on Kepler 442c, his biggest problem was usually finding lost children who had wandered too far into the forest. Ji-Won had only 20 security officers for the whole colony. They carried simple weapons and spent most of their time helping people with small problems. Sometimes they had to rescue someone who got stuck climbing the blue trees. Sometimes they helped find missing tools or settled arguments between neighbors. It was peaceful work, and Ji-Won liked it much better than his old job. The colony had been built in sections. The center had the main buildings like the school, the hospital, and the government offices. Around the center were the homes where families lived. Each family had their own small house with a garden where they could grow vegetables and flowers. Beyond the homes were the farms, where they grew wheat, corn, and other crops in long, straight rows. Past the farms were the mining areas. The colonists had found deposits of valuable metals in the hills. They dug carefully, taking only what they needed and making sure not to hurt the environment. The metals were used to build more homes and tools for the colony. Some were saved to trade with ships that came from other human settlements. Every month, a trade ship would arrive from space. The ships brought news from Earth and other colonies. They brought medical supplies, books, and sometimes new families who wanted to join the settlement. In return, the colony would send back samples of the local plants and animals for scientists on Earth to study. They also sent reports about how well the farming was going. The children loved it when the trade ships came. The ship's crews would tell stories about other worlds and the strange things they had seen. Some crew members would stay for a few days and help teach special classes at the school. Yuna always asked them about the animals on other planets and whether any of them were as interesting as the ones on Kepler 442cc. Life in the colony followed a simple routine. People woke up when the sun rose and went to bed, not long after it set. During the day, adults worked on the farms, in the mines, or in the workshops where they made clothes and furniture. Children went to school in the morning and played in the afternoon. In the evenings, families would eat dinner together and talk about their day. The colonists had built a community center where people gathered for special events. They had dances, concerts, and festivals to celebrate holidays from Earth. They also created new traditions for their new world. Every year on the anniversary of their arrival, they held a big feast and told stories about the early days when they were still building the first houses. Minho often thought about how lucky they were. When the colony ship left Earth, many people said it was too dangerous to travel so far. They said the colonists might find hostile aliens or planets that could not support human life. Instead, they had found a paradise. The weather was good, the soil was fertile, and they had not encountered any dangerous life forms. The biggest animals on the planet were about the size of deer. They were plant eaters with soft brown fur and big, gentle eyes. The children had named them Fluffies and liked to watch them graze in the meadows. There were no predators large enough to threaten humans. Even the insects were harmless, though. Some of them were very colorful and beautiful. Sora rang the school bell, and children came running from all directions. Yuna waved goodbye to her friends and hurried into the classroom. Today, they were going to learn about the water cycle and how rain formed in the clouds. Yuna loved science class because it helped her understand how their new world worked. Ji-Wan made his morning rounds through the colony. He checked on the farms, visited the mining sites, and stopped by the community center. Everything was quiet and normal. His biggest worry was that some of the older children were planning to explore deeper into the forest than they were supposed to. He made a note to talk to their parents about setting better boundaries. As the day went on, the colonists went about their usual work. The farmers tended their crops, the miners dug for metals, and the teachers educated the children. Trade ship. Captain Donghae was scheduled to arrive in 2 weeks with supplies and news from the nearest human outpost. Life was good, peaceful, and full of hope for the future. None of them knew that high above their world, hidden behind one of the planets, 3 small moons, alien ships were watching and waiting. The peaceful days of New Haven were about to come to a terrible end. The silver ships appeared in the morning sky like drops of mercury against the blue. There were 12 of them, sleek and silent, moving in perfect formation above the colony. At first, some of the children pointed and laughed, thinking another trade ship had arrived early. But these ships were different. They were too smooth, too quiet, and they moved in ways that human ships could not. Minho was drinking coffee on his balcony when he saw them. His hand froze halfway to his mouth. In 30 years of space travel, he had never seen ships like these. They had no visible engines, no communication arrays, and no markings that he could recognize. He ran inside and activated the colony's emergency communication system. Commander Velthak stood on the bridge of the lead ship, looking down at the human settlement through the viewing screen. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and large black eyes. His species, the Vectar, had been traveling between stars for over 2,000 years. They had built an empire that stretched across 40 star systems. The Vectar were scientists and collectors. They studied other species and took what they found useful. Their own children were born with limited intelligence, but Vectar scientists had learned how to improve them. They would take the brains of young creatures from other species and harvest the parts that made them smart. Then they would implant these parts into their own children. Velthak had been watching the human colony for 3 months. His scientists had studied the humans carefully. The adults were not interesting to them. Human adults were aggressive and hard to control. But the human children were perfect. Their brains were still growing and changing. The parts that made them creative and intelligent could be easily removed and used. The Vectar had done this many times before. They had taken children from the blue-skinned Altarians, the insect-like Zerion, and dozens of other species. It was simple work. They would stun the adults, take the children, and leave. Most species never even tried to follow them. They were too afraid or too weak to fight back. Down in the colony, alarms began to ring. Ji-Wan rushed to the security center and tried to contact the unknown ships. His radio calls got no answer. The ships just hung in the sky, silent and waiting. He ordered his security team to gather at the school and community center. If these were hostile aliens, the children needed to be protected first. Sora heard the alarms while she was teaching Yuna's class about plant growth. She looked out the window and saw the strange ships floating above the town. Her stomach felt sick with worry. She had heard stories of alien attacks on other human colonies, but she had never thought it would happen here. New Haven was so far from the main space routes that they felt safe from any danger. The children pressed their faces against the classroom windows, excited to see real alien ships. Yuna grabbed her mother's hand and asked if the aliens were friendly like in the storybooks. Sora did not know what to tell her. She gathered all the children in the center of the room and told them to sit quietly while she tried to find out what was happening. Velthak gave the signal to begin. The 12 ships spread out over the colony and descended to just above the treetops. From the bottom of each ship, blue beams of light shot down toward the buildings. The beams did not burn or destroy anything. Instead, they made every human they touched fall down and go to sleep. The attack was fast and efficient. Minho collapsed at his desk while trying to send a message to Earth. Jiwon fell to the ground in the middle of the square, his hand still reaching for his weapon. All over the colony, adults and older teenagers dropped where they stood. Only the youngest children remained awake. The Vectar stunning technology was designed not to work on very young brains. Sora felt the blue beam hit her and tried to fight against the sleepy feeling that washed over her. She reached for Yuna, but her arms would not move. Her vision blurred and everything went dark. The last thing she saw was her daughter's frightened face as alien soldiers entered the classroom. The Vectar soldiers were efficient and emotionless. They wore dark armor that covered their gray skin completely. They moved through the colony in organized groups, stepping over the sleeping humans without a second glance. Their only interest was in the children between the ages of 5 and 12. These were the ones whose brains were at the perfect stage for harvesting. Yuna and her classmates huddled together as the alien soldiers surrounded them. The soldiers were taller than any human, with long arms and strange weapons. They spoke to each other in clicking, whistling sounds that the children could not understand. Some of the younger children began to cry, but the aliens paid no attention to their tears. The soldiers used handheld devices to scan each child's head. The devices made soft beeping sounds and showed colored lights. Children whose scans showed the right patterns were marked with glowing tags placed on their arms. Yuna felt the cold touch of the scanner against her forehead and saw a green light appear on the soldier's device. A moment later, a tag was attached to her shirt. All across the colony, the same scene was happening. In the community center, 60 children who had been playing games were scanned and tagged. At the playground near the farms, another 40 children were processed. The aliens worked with mechanical precision, showing no emotion as they sorted through their victims. Dai-Yun Choi was 9 years old and had been helping his father in the workshop when the attack began. He watched his father collapse and tried to shake him awake. When the alien soldiers found him, he threw tools at them and tried to run. But there was nowhere to go. The soldiers caught him easily and scanned his head. The device beeped, and Dai-Yun received a tag like all the others. Bom Yang was 7 and had been picking flowers in her family's garden. She hid under a big blue tree when she saw the silver ships, but the aliens found her anyway. She did not understand what was happening, but she knew she wanted her mother. The soldiers scanned her and marked her for collection. The sorting process took 2 hours. When it was finished, 129 children had been selected. They were gathered in the main square, surrounded by silent alien guards. The children held hands and whispered to each other, trying to be brave. Many of them kept looking at their sleeping parents, hoping they would wake up and save them. Velthak examined the collection with satisfaction. The human children showed excellent neural development patterns. Their creativity scores were particularly high, which was exactly what the Vectar needed for their next generation of enhanced offspring. This harvest would provide enough material to improve 50 young Vectar. The transport ships landed in the square, their doors opening with a hiss of escaping air. The interior was cold and metallic, with rows of small cages designed to hold young prisoners. The children were loaded, aboard with efficient brutality. Those who resisted were stunned with small weapons that made them dizzy and weak. Yuna found herself pushed into a cage next to Dai-Yun and Bom. Through the small window, she could see her mother lying unconscious near the school steps. She pressed her face against the cold metal bars and called out, but Sora did not move. Tears ran down Yuna's cheeks as the ship began to rise into the sky. The Vectar ships lifted off as smoothly as they had arrived. Within minutes, they were beyond the planet's atmosphere and preparing for the jump to hyperspace. Behind them, they left a colony of sleeping adults and empty playgrounds. The children's toys lay scattered where they had dropped them, and the wind blew through the silent streets. The stunning effect would wear off in about 6 hours. When the adults woke up, they would find their worst nightmare had come true. Their children were gone, taken by aliens who saw them as nothing more than raw materials for experiments. The peaceful colony of New Haven had become the site of the most terrible crime in human history. As the silver ships disappeared into the darkness of space, carrying their precious cargo toward the Vector home system, none of the aliens realized what they had done. They had not just kidnapped human children, they had declared war on the most protective and vengeful species in the galaxy. Sora woke up on the cold ground outside the school. Her head felt heavy and her mouth was dry. For a moment, she could not remember where she was or what had happened. Then she saw the empty playground, and everything came flooding back. The silver, ships, the alien soldiers. Yuna's frightened face as she was taken away. Sora screamed her daughter's name and ran through the empty streets. Other parents were waking up too, calling for their children and searching through buildings that they already knew were empty. The sound of crying and shouting filled the air as the horrible truth became clear. 129 children were gone. Minho stumbled out of the government building, his hands shaking as he tried to activate the emergency communication system. The aliens had not damaged any of the colony's equipment. They had simply taken what they wanted and left. The main computer was still working, the power was still on, and the communication array was ready to send messages across space. The emergency beacon went out on all frequencies, carrying a message that would travel to every human settlement within 100 light years. The message was simple, but carried the weight of absolute desperation. This is New Haven Colony on Kepler 442c. Unknown aliens have attacked our settlement and kidnapped 129 of our children. We need help immediately. On the battleship Righteous Fury, 3 systems away, Admiral Kangmin Ryu was reviewing supply reports when the emergency message reached his ship. Kangmin was 55 years old and had fought in every major human conflict for the past 20 years. He had seen war, death, and destruction, but when he heard that children had been taken, something cold and terrible awakened in his chest. Kangmin had 2 children of his own back on Earth. His daughter was 16 and wanted to be a doctor. His son was 12 and loved to build model spaceships. The thought of them being taken by aliens made his hands clench into fists. He immediately sent new orders to every human military ship in the sector. All missions were canceled. All ships were to proceed to Kepler 442c at maximum speed. Dr. Hyejin Song was working in her laboratory on the research station Darwin's Dream when she received the message. Hyejin was humanity's leading expert on alien life forms. She had studied 17 different alien species and written books about how to communicate with non-human intelligence. But this was not about communication. This was about getting the children back. Yejin began analyzing the scanner data that the colony had managed to record during the attack. The alien ships used technology that was more advanced than anything humans had developed. But advanced. Technology did not make them invincible. Every machine had weaknesses, and every species had blind spots. She would find them. Back on New Haven, Jiwon organized the surviving adults into search teams. Even though they knew the children were no longer on the planet, they had to do something. They searched every building, every cave, and every corner of the forest. They found toys, books, and small shoes, but no children. The silence where young voices should have been was the most terrible sound any of them had ever heard. Taewon. Jang was the colony's communications officer. He was 28 years old and had joined the colony ship to get away from the crowded cities of Earth. His own nephew had been among the children taken. Taewon worked around the clock to coordinate with the incoming human forces, his eyes red from crying and lack of sleep. The first military ship arrived 18 hours after the attack. It was the destroyer Vengeance, commanded by Captain Sung-ho Park. Sung-ho brought 30 combat specialists and advanced scanning equipment. They immediately began analyzing the area where the alien ships had landed, looking for any clue about where the children had been taken. Within 3 days, 47 human warships had gathered in the Kepler system. They came from military bases, exploration fleets, and even civilian cargo ships that had been converted for combat. The message had spread through human space like wildfire. not just military personnel, but ordinary people who had heard about the kidnapping and wanted to help. Captain Minji Lee commanded the heavy cruiser Retribution. She had been transporting supplies to a mining colony when she received the emergency message. Without hesitation, she had changed course and joined the growing fleet. Her crew included parents, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. When they heard that children had been taken, they all volunteered for combat duty. The response was unprecedented in human history. Ships arrived from colonies that were supposed to be neutral in military conflicts. Merchant captains volunteered their vessels for combat conversion. Retired soldiers came out of retirement and demanded to be assigned to combat units. The kidnapping had touched something primal in the human species. Admiral Kang Min established his command center on New Haven and met with the colony's leaders. Sora sat at the conference table, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee. She had not slept since the attack and would not eat until her daughter was found. Her eyes burned with a fury that made even battle-hardened soldiers uncomfortable. Minho showed the Admiral the security recordings from the attack. The alien soldiers moved with mechanical precision, showing no emotion as they processed the children like cargo. They scanned each child's head and selected only the ones that met their criteria. It was clear that this was not random violence. The aliens had come specifically for human children. Dr. Hyejin arrived on the passenger ship New Horizon and immediately began studying the alien technology traces. She found energy signatures that did not match any known species in human databases. These aliens were new, and they had capabilities that humanity had never encountered before. But she also found something else in the data that gave her hope. Thar alien ships had left a hyperspace trail when they departed. It was faint and would not last long, but it might be enough to track them. Human ships could not follow hyperspace trails as easily as some alien species, but they had other advantages. They had determination, ingenuity, and most importantly, they had nothing left to lose. Ji-won worked with the military specialists to piece together everything they knew about the attack. The aliens had studied the colony for months before striking. They knew exactly when the children would be in school and where the security forces were stationed. This was not a random raid. It was a carefully planned operation. As more ships arrived, the human fleet grew to over 200 vessels. It was the largest military force humanity had ever assembled, brought together not by government orders or military strategy, but by the simple fact that someone had taken their children. Every parent in human space understood that this could have happened to their own family. The aliens had made a fundamental mistake about human nature. They saw humans as a young, primitive species that would be too frightened to fight back. They had encountered dozens of other species that had simply accepted the loss of their children and moved on. They had no understanding of the bond between human parents and their offspring. Lieutenant Commander Yun Bi-han was a military psychologist who had studied alien behavior patterns. She explained to the Admiral that most species in the galaxy did not form the same emotional attachments to their young that humans did. Many alien species laid hundreds of eggs and expected most of their offspring to die. The idea of parents fighting to the death for their children was foreign to them, but humans were different. Human children required years of care and protection. Human parents formed bonds with their offspring that could drive them to incredible acts of courage and violence. The aliens had not just committed a crime. They had triggered an evolutionary response that was millions of years old. The search teams found evidence that the aliens had been observing the colony for months. Hidden sensors had been placed in the forest, recording the daily routines of the children. The aliens knew which children were the smartest, which ones were the most creative, and which ones would be the best subjects for their experiments. Captain In-woo Kim arrived with the assault ship Thunderstrike and brought disturbing news from other human colonies. Intelligence reports suggested that similar attacks had happened to non-human species across the galaxy. The aliens were not specifically targeting humans. They were collecting children from any species that met their biological requirements. This information changed everything. The aliens were not just criminals who had attacked one human colony. They were running a systematic operation to kidnap children from multiple species. They had been doing it for years, possibly decades, and they had never been stopped because no one had ever fought back hard enough to make them stop. Admiral Kang Min stood before the assembled fleet commanders and made a promise that would echo across human space. "We will find our children," he said. "We will bring them home, and we will make sure that no alien species ever thinks of taking human children again. This ends now." The hunt was about to begin, and the galaxy was about to learn why you should never threaten a human child. The human fleet that assembled over Kepler 442c was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. 847 warships filled the space around the planet, from massive dreadnoughts that could destroy entire cities to small fighter squadrons that moved like angry wasps. But this was more than just military might. This was human creativity unleashed by parental fury. Captain Sunwoo Han commanded the reconnaissance squadron aboard the stealth ship Silent Hunter. Sunwoo was 33 years old and had spent his career tracking pirates and smugglers through hyperspace. But he had never tracked anyone who had stolen children before. This mission felt different. This mission felt personal. The hyperspace trail left by the alien ships was fading fast. Most species could only follow such trails for a few hours after they were made. But human scientists had developed new quantum tracking technology that could follow even old trails by looking for disturbances in space-time itself. It was experimental and dangerous, but it was their only hope. Dr. Hygiene worked with Sunwoo's team to modify the Silent Hunter's sensors. They installed quantum field detectors that had never been tested in combat conditions. The equipment was so sensitive that it could be damaged by a strong solar wind, but it might be able to follow the alien ships across multiple star systems. The Silent Hunter jumped into hyperspace with a small escort of 4 other reconnaissance ships. They followed the fading trail through the twisted dimensions of faster-than-light travel, where normal physics did not apply. The quantum detectors worked perfectly, showing them the path the alien ships had taken 3 days earlier. The trail led them through the Centauri system, past the human mining colonies on Proxima Beta. The aliens had not stopped there, which meant they were not interested in taking more children right away. They were heading somewhere specific, somewhere that was important enough to risk traveling deeper into human space. Admiral Kang Min waited for reports from the reconnaissance mission while organizing the main fleet. He divided the ships into 3 groups. The first group would follow the trail as soon as Sunwoo found it. The second group would stay behind to protect other human colonies from similar attacks. The third group would spread out to gather intelligence about these aliens from other species. Commander Jisoo Park prepared her special forces teams for what might be the most dangerous mission in human history. Jisoo was 41 years old and had led rescue operations on 17 different worlds. She had saved hostages from pirates, extracted diplomats from war zones, and rescued survivors from crashed ships. But she had never tried to rescue children from an advanced alien civilization. Jisoo's teams trained constantly while they waited for the reconnaissance reports. They practiced boarding alien ships, fighting in zero gravity, and rescuing civilians under fire. Every soldier in her unit understood that this mission was different from anything they had done before. Failure was not an option when children's lives were at stake. The third day after the Silent Hunter departed, they received a message that changed everything. Sunwoo's team had followed the trail to a star system 47 light-years from human space. What they found there was beyond their worst nightmares. The Vector home system contained 6 planets orbiting a yellow star. The third planet, called Nexus Prime, was a massive world covered in cities that stretched from pole to pole. The cities were built in layers, with the tallest buildings reaching into the clouds and the lowest levels extending deep underground. It was home to over 20 billion Vector. But that was not the worst part. Sunwoo's long-range sensors detected dozens of prison facilities scattered across the planet's surface. Each facility held thousands of young creatures from different species. The Vector had been collecting children from across the galaxy for decades, maybe centuries. The human children were just the newest additions to their vast collection. Intelligence Officer Nari Moon analyzed the intercepted Vector communications from her position aboard the spy ship Shadow Walker. Nari had learned 17 alien languages during her career and was skilled at breaking enemy codes. What she discovered in the Vector transmissions made her feel sick to her stomach. The aliens called their operation the Enhancement Project. They surgically removed parts of children's brains that controlled creativity, problem-solving, and emotional intelligence. These parts were then implanted into young Vectar, giving them abilities their species did not naturally possess. The alien children who underwent this procedure became the leaders and scientists of Vectar society. The most horrifying discovery was that the process was irreversible. Once the surgery was performed, the victim children lost their intelligence permanently. They became empty shells, kept alive only to serve as slaves in the lower levels of Vectar cities. Nari's analysis suggested that the human children had perhaps 72 hours before the surgeries would begin. When Admiral Kang Min received this intelligence, he made a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. He ordered the entire fleet to jump to the Vectar system immediately. There was no time for careful planning or diplomatic contact. The children had to be rescued before it was too late, no matter what the cost. The jump to the Vectar system took 8 hours of hyperspace travel. When the human fleet emerged near Nexus Prime, they found themselves facing the most powerful alien civilization they had ever encountered. The Vectar had over 3,000 warships defending their home system, armed with weapons that could destroy a human ship with a single shot. Captain Young-Ho Shin commanded the assault cruiser Hammer of Justice. When he saw the size of the enemy fleet, he knew that many humans would die in the coming battle. But he also knew that there was no choice. Those children down on the planet were counting on them. Every human parent in the galaxy was counting on them. The Vectar were shocked to see human ships in their system. In all their centuries of taking children from other species, no one had ever followed them home. Most species were too afraid or too primitive to track them across interstellar space. The idea that these young humans had not only followed them but brought a war fleet was almost unbelievable. Velthok, who had led the raid on New Haven, was aboard the Vectar flagship when the human fleet appeared. He immediately sent a message to the human admiral, offering to negotiate. In his experience, primitive species could usually be bought off with technology or resources. He offered to return 50 of the human children in exchange for the fleet's withdrawal. Admiral Kangman's response was broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship in both fleets could hear it. "We did not come here to negotiate," he said. "We came here to take back our children, all of them, and to make sure you never take anyone's children again." The battle plans were desperate but necessary. The human fleet would have to split into 3 groups. The first group would engage the Vectar Navy and keep them busy. The second group would fight their way through the planet's orbital defenses. The third group would land on the surface and locate the prison facilities where the children were being held. Commander Jisoo knew that her special forces teams would have to fight their way through a city of 20 billion hostile aliens. The odds were impossible, but the mission was not optional. Somewhere in those massive cities, 129 human children were waiting for rescue. Along with thousands of other children from dozens of different species, Captain Minji Lee prepared her crew for what might be their final battle. The heavy cruiser Retribution would lead the assault on the orbital platforms that defended Nexus Prime. Her ship was tough and heavily armed, but the Vectar weapons were more advanced than anything humans had faced before. As the 2 fleets prepared for combat, neither side fully understood what was about to happen. The Vectar thought they were facing a primitive species that would retreat after suffering a few casualties. They had no idea that human parents would fight to the death for their children, accepting any loss as long as the children were saved. The humans knew they were outgunned and outnumbered, but they also knew something the Vectar did not. They knew that some things were worth dying for. The children down on that planet were not just casualties of war. They were the future of humanity, and no alien species would be allowed to steal that future. The order to attack was given at 0800 ship time. 847 human warships opened fire on the Vectar fleet, beginning the largest battle in human history. The rescue mission had begun, and there would be no retreat until every child was safely home. The Battle of Nexus Prime began at dawn, ship time. 847 human warships opened fire on the Vectar fleet in a display of fury that lit up the dark space around the alien homeworld. The first salvo destroyed 12 Vectar ships and damaged 30 more. The aliens had not expected such aggressive tactics from what they considered a primitive species. Captain Junho Kang commanded the heavy cruiser Infinite Rage. His ship was already damaged from the first exchange of fire, with hull breaches on 3 decks and his main engines running at half power. But when he saw a group of Vectar destroyers trying to escape toward hyperspace, he made a decision that would be remembered for generations. Junho ordered his ship to ram the largest enemy destroyer rather than let it escape. The Infinite Rage accelerated to full speed, its damaged hull groaning under the stress. His crew had just enough time to reach the escape pods before the 2 ships collided in a massive explosion that destroyed both vessels. Junho went down with his ship, but the Vectar destroyer never made it to hyperspace. The collision sent a clear message to both fleets. The humans were not fighting a normal military engagement. They were fighting with the desperate fury of parents, who would accept any sacrifice to save their children. The Vectar had never faced an enemy like this before. Admiral Kangman watched the battle from the bridge of the Righteous Fury. His flagship was surrounded by enemy fire, but he never considered retreat. Every ship they lost brought them closer, to the planet where the children were being held. Every Vectar ship they destroyed meant fewer enemies between the rescue teams and their target. The Vectar had superior technology, but they were fighting defensively. They tried to preserve their ships and minimize their losses. The humans fought with complete disregard for their own safety. When a human ship lost its weapons, it tried to ram enemy vessels. When a ship lost its engines, it became a stationary gun platform, fighting until it was destroyed. Captain Minji Lee led the second wave of attacks against the orbital defense platforms that protected Nexus Prime. Her heavy cruiser Retribution took massive damage as it approached the planet, but she kept firing until her ship broke through the defensive line. Behind her, 30 other ships followed through the gap she had created. The orbital platforms had weapons that could destroy a human ship with a single shot, but they were designed to fight conventional space battles. The human tactics were anything but conventional. Damaged ships continued to fight. Pilots with mortal wounds stayed at their controls. Ships with failing life support systems ignored the danger and pressed their attacks. Lieutenant Commander Do-Young Park was the pilot of a small fighter craft when his squadron was attacked by Vectar interceptors. His fighter was hit and began to lose air, but he saw that one of the enemy ships was heading toward a group of human transport vessels. Without hesitation, he guided his dying fighter into a collision course with the enemy interceptor, destroying both ships. The battle raged for 18 hours. Human ships broke through the Vectar lines again and again, accepting massive casualties to create openings for the rescue mission. The space around Nexus Prime became a graveyard of twisted metal and burning plasma. But slowly, surely, the human forces fought their way closer to the planet. Commander Jisoo Park led the first wave of ground forces to reach the surface of Nexus Prime. Her assault ship Thunderstrike landed in the middle of a Vectar city, its hull glowing red-hot from the atmospheric entry. Before the ship had even stopped moving, Jisoo and her Special Forces teams were running down the loading ramps with weapons ready. The Vectar cities were massive and confusing, with buildings that stretched up into the clouds and down into the planet's crust. The aliens had never fought a ground war on their home planet before. Their security forces were designed to control slaves and prisoners, not to fight against determined human soldiers. Jisoo's teams had studied the intelligence reports and knew where the prison facilities were located, but getting there meant fighting, through streets filled with hostile aliens and navigating buildings that were designed by non-human minds. The architecture made no sense to human eyes, with corridors that curved in impossible directions and rooms that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions. The Vectar civilians fled in panic as human soldiers advanced through their cities. Most Vectar had never seen another intelligent species except for the child slaves they kept in the lower levels. The sight of armed humans fighting with desperate determination was terrifying to them. Sergeant Young-Ho Shin and his squad were assigned to secure a corridor that led to one of the main prison complexes. The corridor was defended by 50 Vectar guards armed with energy weapons. Young-Ho's squad had only 12 soldiers, but they held that corridor for 6 hours against overwhelming odds. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Young-Ho, still alive but badly wounded, surrounded by the bodies of enemy soldiers. The Vectar had never understood why other species cared so much about their offspring. To them, young creatures were just raw materials for biological enhancement. They could not comprehend why humans would sacrifice so much for beings that had not yet proven their value to society. Captain Leah Im led her team through the underground, levels where the youngest prisoners were kept. The conditions were horrific. Children from dozens of different species were kept in small cages, fed barely enough to keep them alive. Many of them had been there for years and had forgotten their own languages. When Leah found the first group of human children, she had to fight back tears. Yuna, Dayan, Bomb, and 26 other children from New Haven were huddled together in a cage designed for animals. They were frightened and confused, but they were alive. The Vectar had not yet begun the brain harvesting procedures on the newest arrivals. The rescue was complicated by the fact that the prison complex was deep underground and heavily defended. Leah's team had to fight their way through multiple levels of Vectar guards while protecting the children they had already rescued. Every minute they stayed in the complex, more enemy reinforcements arrived. Staff Sergeant Kyung-ho Nam volunteered to stay behind and hold off the pursuing Vectar guards while the rescue teams evacuated the children. He set up a defensive position at a choke point in the tunnel system and fought alone against waves of enemy soldiers. His sacrifice bought the rescue teams the time they needed to reach the surface with their precious cargo. The evacuation was a nightmare of running battles through alien corridors. Human soldiers carried children who were too weak to walk. They fought off Vectar guards while navigating through a city that was designed to confuse and disorient intruders. But every human soldier understood that failure was not an option. When the first transport ships lifted off from Nexus Prime carrying rescued children, a cheer went up from every human ship in the system. The impossible had been accomplished. They had penetrated the defenses of an advanced alien civilization and rescued their children from captivity. But the mission was not over. There were still thousands of children from other species trapped in the Vectar prison complexes. The humans had not come all this way just to save their own. They had come to put an end to the enhancement project forever. The ground fighting continued for another 12 hours as human forces systematically destroyed every prison facility on the planet. They rescued not just human children, but young creatures from dozens of other species. Some of the alien children had been prisoners for so long that they had to be taught how to walk again. As the last rescue ships departed from Nexus Prime, Admiral Kangmin prepared for the final phase of the operation. The children were safe, but the Vectar Empire still existed. As long as they had the technology and the desire to harvest children's brains, they would always be a threat to every civilized species in the galaxy. The time had come to send a message that would be heard across the stars. The time had come to show the galaxy what happened when someone stole human children. The time had come for eradication. As the last rescue ships departed from Nexus Prime carrying the freed children, Admiral Kangmin stood on the bridge of the righteous fury and made a decision that would echo across the galaxy for generations. The children were safe, but that was not enough. The Vectar Empire had committed the one crime that humanity could never forgive. They had stolen children and turned them into slaves. The Admiral activated the fleet-wide communication system and spoke to every human ship in the system. His voice was calm, but filled with cold determination. All ships, this is Admiral Kangmin. We have successfully rescued our children and thousands of others. But our mission is not complete. The Vectar Empire has been kidnapping and torturing children for centuries. This cannot be allowed to continue. The response from the fleet was immediate and unanimous. Every captain, every crew member, every soldier understood what had to be done. The Vectar had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. They had declared war on the concept of childhood itself, and humanity would not let that stand. The Eradication Protocol was not something that existed in any military manual. It was created in that moment, born from the collective rage of every human parent who had ever loved a child. The protocol was simple. The Vectar Empire would cease to exist. Every ship, every station, every world would be destroyed. There would be no negotiations, no surrender, and no mercy. Captain Sun Woo Han's reconnaissance ships had already mapped the entire Vectar Empire during the battle. 43 star systems, over 200 inhabited worlds, and thousands of space stations and mining facilities. It was a vast civilization that had taken 2,000 years to build. Humanity would tear it down in a matter of weeks. The fleet divided into hunting groups, each one assigned to a different part of Vectar space. They moved with mechanical precision, jumping from system to system and destroying everything they found. The Vectar had superior technology, but they were spread too thin to mount an effective defense against the human assault. Dr. Hyejin had decoded the Vectar computer systems during the battle for Nexus Prime. She discovered detailed records of every species they had victimized over the centuries. The blue-skinned Altarians had lost over 10,000 children before their civilization collapsed from grief. The insect-like Xerion had been completely enslaved after their young were taken. Dozens of other species had suffered the same fate. The humans shared this information with the surviving members of the victimized species. When the Altarian survivors learned that their children's murderers were being destroyed, they sent their few remaining ships to join the human fleet. The Xerion. Rebels provided intelligence about Vectar weaknesses. Even species that had never met humans before volunteered to help with the eradication. Commander Jisoo led ground assaults on 17 different Vectar worlds. Her forces found evidence of the enhancement project on every planet they visited. Underground laboratories where children's brains were dissected. Storage facilities where neural tissue was kept in tanks. Training centers where enhanced Vectar learned to use their stolen abilities. The most disturbing discovery was that the Vectar had been planning to expand their operations. They had identified over 100 other species as potential sources of neural material, including several that had not yet developed space travel. The humans had stopped them just in time to prevent an even greater catastrophe. Captain Minji fought in the Battle of Xerion 7, where the Vectar made their last major stand. The enemy had fortified the system with every ship they could gather, hoping to stop the human advance. The battle lasted 3 days and cost humanity 47 ships. But when it was over, the Vectar fleet was completely destroyed. The Vectar tried to surrender when they realized they could not win. They offered to return all the children they had taken and promised never to harvest neural tissue again. They offered to share their advanced technology and pay tribute to humanity for 1,000 years. But Admiral Kangmin's response never changed. "You stole our children. There can be no forgiveness." Some of the Vectar attempted to flee to other galaxies, but human ships were waiting at every hyperspace route. Captain Junho's sacrifice had inspired a new human tactic called ramming runs, where damaged ships would deliberately collide with escaping enemy vessels. No Vectar ship made it out of their home galaxy alive. The final battle took place at Vectar Prime, the original homeworld of their species. The planet was defended by orbital fortresses that had protected the Vectar for 1,000 years. But the human fleet that arrived there was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Over 2,000 ships gathered from every human colony and military base in known space. Lieutenant Commander Yunbi had studied Vectar psychology during the campaign and made a disturbing discovery. The aliens genuinely did not understand why other species cared about their children. To them, offspring were just biological resources to be used for the good of the Empire. They could not comprehend the love that drove human parents to such extremes. This realization made the humans even more determined to complete the eradication. A species that could not understand parental love was too dangerous to be allowed to exist. They would always see other species' children as raw materials. For their experiments, the bombardment of Vectar Prime lasted 12 hours. Every city, every installation, every sign of Vectar civilization was reduced to glowing craters. The humans used weapons they had never used before, including antimatter bombs that turned matter into pure energy. When the bombardment ended, Vectar Prime was a dead rock floating in space. The last Vectar died in a mining station in the outer rim of their territory. Captain Youngho's assault team found them hiding in an asteroid mine, along with 50 kidnapped children from a species called the Melodians. The Vectar begged for mercy, claiming they were just following orders. The humans killed them all and rescued the children. Within 37 days of the attack on New Haven, the Vectar Empire was completely destroyed. 43 star systems had been swept clean of their presence. Every ship, every station, every trace of their civilization had been eliminated. The species that had terrorized the galaxy for 2,000 years was extinct. The rescued children were returned to their home worlds whenever possible. Many species had thought their young were lost forever and wept with joy when human ships arrived with their offspring. The children who had no homes to return to were adopted by human families and given new lives among the stars. Sora held Yuna close as they watched the news broadcasts from New Haven. Her daughter was safe and would grow up to become a teacher, like her mother. But Yuna would also grow up knowing that when she had been in danger, her entire species had mobilized to save her. She would never take that protection for granted. Dayun and Bomb returned to their families and eventually joined the Earth Defense Fleet when they came of age. They became officers on ships that patrolled the galaxy, making sure that no other species would ever attempt what the Vectar had done. They told other alien civilizations about the day humanity came for its children. The story spread across the galaxy like a wave. Every spacefaring species learned about the humans who had destroyed an entire empire to rescue their young. The message was clear and unmistakable. Human children were not to be touched, ever, under any circumstances. Years later, when diplomatic contacts were established with new alien civilizations, human negotiators would always begin with the same warning. "We are a peaceful species," they would say, "but we have one absolute rule. If you harm our children, we will erase you from existence. This is not a threat. This is a promise." The galaxy had learned a simple truth that day. There was no force in the universe more dangerous than human parents protecting their young. The Vectar Empire had discovered this truth too late to save themselves. On New Haven, children played safely in the meadows under the blue trees, watched over by parents, who knew that their species would go to any length to keep them safe. The colony had been rebuilt, stronger than before. But most importantly, the children could grow up knowing that they were loved beyond measure. The peaceful days had returned to New Haven, but they were protected now by the knowledge that humanity would never again allow anyone to steal their children. The galaxy was a safer place for all young creatures, and the price of that safety had been paid in full by the extinct Vectar Empire. Touch a human child and prepare for eradication. The galaxy would remember that lesson for a very long time.